Well, I guess if anyone was gonna make a movie about a UFO trying to eat horse ranchers, it was probably Jordan Peele. Okay, so Jordan Peele has tackled suspense and horror, now he's trying his hand at sci-fi. Sort of. This still felt more like a suspense movie to me, but that's fine. If he wants to stay in his wheelhouse, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's not like you can't have one without the other. This is kind of new territory for him, though, and I think the results are a little bit mixed. First of all, I think Jordan Peele puts a lot of other modern-day suspense filmmakers to shame, and not just because most modern-day horror and suspense is pretty terrible, though that's part of it. So many of these films today are very formulaic with a huge over-reliance on jump scares that are so cookie-cutter you can see them coming a mile away. Like, I'll be watching one of these movies, seeing how the camera's lingering on something, and saying to myself, okay, something's gonna jump out at them in 3, 2, 1, and there it is. And the biggest compliment I can give Jordan Peele is that he's a savvy enough filmmaker to not fall into that trap. There are jump scares in this movie, but not as many as you might think. The film doesn't rely on them, and he works hard to earn every one. When you do jump scares every 5 minutes like you see in other movies, they stop meaning anything pretty quickly. But if you have several scenes building up to one scare that the audience doesn't necessarily see coming, that's when it works. So there aren't a ton of jump scares in Nope, thankfully, but when they are in there, they're effective. That, even by itself, I count as a big win. And something that helps this a lot is patience. Peele isn't in a huge rush to get to the next scene, the next scene, the next scene. He likes to hold on shots for a bit before cutting away to let everything breathe. And that can be great for building quiet, subtle tension, though it does mean that scenes sometimes go on longer than they need to if you're not careful. So Peele definitely knows how to build suspense, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword because the strategy he likes to do this with can really affect the pacing of the movie. And I don't mind a slow-paced movie when it's done well, but I don't think that decision meshed great with some of the story and character choices he made here. The movie has a really small cast. There's only 2 main characters, with 3 supporting who dip in and dip out when the story needs them, and some side people who don't really matter. And for most of the movie, we're on the 2 mains, the brother and sister, so that's a lot of screen time for each of them together and individually. The actors are good. I like their relationship a lot. It's a fun dynamic with the brother who's really quiet and introverted and the sister who's very outgoing and never shuts up. So I saw what Peele was going for with these 2. The issue comes when we're spending time with the brother, because this guy is introverted to the point where he barely talks through the whole movie, so scenes with him have very little dialogue. And that's fine when you're trying to build tension, but for regular scenes that might just be there for texture or exposition or are meant to relieve tension, it suddenly becomes a lot less engaging because this character is written to be so closed off and unexpressive. So of course that's what the sister's there for, to handle the dialogue and exposit stuff we need to know, and I thought she was one of the best things about this. But when the brother's off doing stuff by himself, it kind of feels like we're just hitting the same note over and over with this guy, where tension building scenes, as well as all the other kind, are all played the exact same way, which I can see people getting impatient with. And when you combine that with the slow approach that Peele takes with the story, it does feel like the movie drags for a while, especially in the first half. It does take some time for things to get moving, because when you've only really got 2 main characters in a story that wants to percolate before we get into it, pushing your narrative forward can be a little challenging. And it doesn't help that the movie's longer than it needs to be too. It clocks in at about 2 hours, 11 minutes, and you could have cut it down to under 2 hours. There was some stuff in there the movie really didn't need. There's a subplot involving flashbacks about a monkey that gets a decent amount of time, and even when I was watching it, I was wondering why this wasn't on the cutting room floor. It didn't seem to have anything to do with the UFO plot, or have any super relevant information the audience needed, and it does end up being symbolically related to the UFO, but not in any way that absolutely had to be in there, or would outweigh the benefit to the pacing you could have had by cutting those scenes out. So the movie does take a little too long long getting to the point. And for a while, I didn't even mind that so much because the stuff with the UFO was so good. When the UFO first shows up, that's when the movie is at its best. I love the way those night scenes were shot too, how everything looked like it was lit by a really bright full moon, so you and the characters can actually see pretty well, but not well enough to completely understand what you're looking at. It's just enough so you know that there's something really up out there, but not exactly what it is, which is perfect. This is when the movie was really gripping. This is where the biggest scares are. Unfortunately, that's around the beginning to middle part of the movie. It doesn't really hit those heights again once it moves into the third act, for a couple reasons. Number one, because the climax takes place during the day, and everything's less frightening in the daylight than it is in the dark. And number two, the UFO becomes less scary the more we learn about it. It's very scary when it's a mystery, but as the characters start to figure out what its deal is, how it behaves, how it reacts to certain things and whatnot, it becomes not so much frightening as weird. And that's not the same thing. It stops being the shark in the water that you're desperately trying to get away from before it eats you, and becomes more like a video game boss fight where there's like an attack pattern and you need to do certain things and avoid doing other things, and there's a puzzle you have to figure out, and it's still dangerous. But when you compare this to the scenes at night when the UFO first appears and we don't know why it's there or what it's doing, all the stuff in the climax, I just wasn't feeling as much. What made it scary was the mystery, and when the mystery's gone, the scares go with it. Some things are just more frightening when we don't know that much about them, because the questions are more compelling than the answers a lot of the time. And it seems like that was the case here. And this is also when the strangest stuff in the movie happens. They were introducing some new concepts that I'm sure looked interesting on paper, but in execution they came off kind of awkward. The UFO starts doing a bunch of new shit that isn't really explained, and it's not totally clear what's happening, and not in that fun, mysterious way either. More like there's information I need to understand what's going on in the story, and I'm just not getting it. I think the climax still works as is, but it definitely felt like the movie was starting to get away from Peele at that point. Nope is an interesting but flawed film. The scenes at night are the best. That's when it's the most suspenseful, that's when the scares really work, but when the third act rolls around and you reach the climax that plays out during the day, the movie kind of becomes something else that felt less compelling than what it was before. I like the cast a lot, but it's so small that it puts a lot of pressure on the actors to keep the narrative moving, and when the story itself is so slow-paced, that's kind of an uphill battle, especially when one of the two lead characters barely speaks. And it also introduces some concepts that are fairly important, but aren't explored or fleshed out as much as they could have been, and end up being a little confusing. I'd still probably rate this above a lot of the other stuff in the suspense genre right now, because there is obvious craftsmanship on display here, even when it doesn't totally hit the mark, but I think the script could have used one more draft before they rolled cameras on this thing. There is a lot of good stuff in here. It's certainly not a bad movie. I liked it. I just didn't love it. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought about Nope in the comments. While you're here, ding that bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. I also have a live streaming channel. Links to everything are down there. And most importantly, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, share, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to be sucked up into a mysterious UFO to its gruesome demise is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more soon. So stay tuned for that, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.